Have you ever wondered what it feels like to discover that the people you call family never truly saw you as their own? In the town of Katora, where evening smell of roasted maize and red earth warms the feet, a young woman named Amara believed routine would keep life steady. She counted other people's cash at the small bank near the motor park, walked home through market chatter, and tried not to answer sharp words with sharper ones. Then, one sunset, she paused beside a quiet stranger seated by a peeling wall. He did not ask for anything. He only stared at the ground like someone waiting for courage. Amara placed folded notes beside him and whispered, "Please eat. If you were there, would you keep walking or stop?" Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Amara worked hard because steady work made sense when people did not. Her stepmother, Kletchi, ran the house with rules you could feel in your bones. Tea by 7. Chores in a rotation no one dared question. Her younger sister, Adiz, had beauty and confidence and a boyfriend who always needed one last loan. Their brother, Chaik, had plans that never made it past the compound gate. Amara learned to keep kindness quiet, like a secret tucked into a pocket. That evening, when Adiz announced at the doorway that Amara fed a stranger again, the room filled with laughter that did not reach anyone's eyes. Kletchi set her cup down harder than she meant to and asked why. Amara answered softly, and the answer felt small in the large, tiled room, because he looked hungry. Have you ever tried to explain compassion to people who measure worth in a different currency? 2 days later, the sky turned the color of ripe mango, and the market began packing itself away. Amara saw the same young man walking slowly, his steps careful, like someone saving strength. She matched his pace and asked if he had eaten. He said his name was Kletchi, that he was between jobs since leaving a mechanic's yard where pay came late and left early. His palms were nicked, the kind of cuts that tell you a person works with honest tools. Amara pressed bus fare into his hand. He met her eyes and tried to give it back. She insisted. On the bus home, she remembered her father slipping coins into her school bag with a wink, calling it future luck. When she reached the gate, she heard Adiz arguing on the phone about money and felt worry slide under the door with her. If someone you love keeps stepping near a ditch, how close do you stand? At home, a small storm waited, and it did not need thunder to be loud. Adiz declared that helping strangers only attracts trouble. Chaik joked about Amara opening a charity from her salary. Kletchi asked if Amara planned to sponsor the whole town. Amara said nothing for a long time. Later, in her room, she laid out her ledger: rent contribution, food money, church envelopes, little savings that looked even smaller beside dreams. She traced her father's old signature in an old letter and heard his quiet laugh. A week after he passed, the house had become many rooms and fewer words. If you have ever lived in a place where grief rearranged the furniture, you know silence can be heavy. Sometimes the only way to carry it is to pick up something else, anything, even a stranger's burden, for a moment. One evening, wind carried the smell of rain before the first drop. Amara took the longer road home to think in peace. Near the old post office, she found Kletchi again, this time leaning against the wall, eyes closed, jaw tight. A group of boys had shoved him earlier, telling him to go beg elsewhere. He had a swollen lip and scraped elbow, the clumsy injuries of someone trying not to fight. Amara felt heat rise in her chest. She asked if he could walk to the clinic near the taxi rank. He shook his head, embarrassed about money. She said she did not ask if he could pay. She asked if he could walk. They went. The nurse cleaned him up, said he needed food and rest. Amara bought bean cakes and water, and watched him eat slowly, careful not to rush. Have you ever noticed how hunger teaches patience no one asks to learn? A week later, the bank manager placed a notice on Amara's desk about a new pilot program. Small loans for skilled workers with references instead of formal collateral. She thought of Kletchi's hands, of tools and nicked skin, and a gaze that did not expect pity. She asked if he had a former supervisor willing to vouch for him. He squared his shoulders and said yes. The cousin of his old boss ran a small workshop in a backway and might speak for him. Amara explained the terms, the interest, the risk. He listened like someone memorizing a song. They met the cousin 2 days later. The man was skeptical until Kletchi named parts no lazy person remembers. A test was arranged. Fix an old generator no one else could. Kletchi cleaned contacts, tightened wires, checked fuel, pulled the cord, and sound returned to a shop that had forgotten its own voice. Sometimes opportunity knocks softly. Sometimes it hums. At dinner, Amara mentioned the pilot program without names. Mom and Kletchi's spoon stilled in her hand. Bank people and their charity, she said. If he fails, will you pay for his failure? Adiz rolled her eyes and said the only wise loan is the one that marries you into wealth. Chaik declared he had an idea for a transport business that needed only a small push, an idea he had been pushing for months. Amara listened, aware that in some houses, success is a coat everyone tries on, and failure is a stain that belongs to one person. She did not argue. She had learned that some questions only time can answer, and some answers need the quiet proof of a generator that starts on the first pull. Have you met resistance that melts only when results arrive with no trumpet? 2 weeks later, Kletchi signed for a modest loan, bought a set of used tools, and started taking small repair jobs outside the market. He showed receipts, paid a tiny installment, and began saving for shade cloth to keep sun off his customers. He thanked Amara with words that did not oversell gratitude. She told him to thank her by paying on time. At the bank, whispers began, the harmless type that grows legs. Some said Amara had a project, others said she had a soft spot. She kept her head down and balanced columns. At home, Adiz practiced new introductions in the mirror. Adiz, fiancé of the Obi family's youngest son, though no one from the family had visited. If you have ever watched someone rehearse a future that hasn't called their name yet, you know the sound of hope can be loud enough to deafen caution. Rainy season slipped in like a familiar guest, steady and inconvenient. Kletchi's small corner needed a tarp. Amara helped him cost it, and he insisted on paying from his earnings. He kept a notebook where he wrote every job, every payment, every complaint. One entry read, "Learn to listen twice before touching a wire." Another read, "Eat. A hungry hand makes mistakes." 3 months after the loan, the bank manager smiled in a way Amara had not seen since last Christmas. "A pilot rarely goes as planned," he said, "but this looked promising." He asked Amara if she knew others like Kletchi. She said maybe. She also understood that for every story that works, there are 3 that do not, and mercy alone cannot change that math. Have you balanced kindness with boundaries and found the line only when you crossed it? The turning point came on a day that looked like any other from the outside. The market smelled of wet ground and pepper. Amara returned home to find the sitting room too quiet, the way silence gathers when people are waiting to say something heavy. Mom and Kletchi stood by the window, arms folded. Adiz sat with her chin high. Chaik wore a grin he did not earn. On the table lay a document and an old photograph Amara had never seen. Mom and Kletchi told her to sit. Then she said what she had wanted to say for years and had practiced saying in her mind so many times the words came out without shaking. "Amara, I raised you, but you are not my blood." The photograph showed a young woman holding a baby, standing beside Amara's late father. The baby was Amara. The woman was not Mom and Kletchi. Amara felt the room tilt, but slowly, like a boat shifting, not capsizing. The ground did not disappear. It moved. She asked where the woman was now. Mom and Kletchi said the woman had died long ago, before she married Amara's father. He had begged her to raise the child as her own. "I fed you," she said, the words careful and sharp. "I clothed you. But blood calls to blood. This house belongs to my children." Adi's smile flickered at the edges, and Chaik looked at the floor, perhaps sorry, perhaps not. Amara folded the photograph and placed it gently on the table. She thanked Mom and Kletchi for raising her. She asked for time to think. If you ever learned a truth that rearranged your past, did it also rewrite your future, or did it simply add a chapter you didn't know you had read? News travels by foot and by rumor. The next morning, at the bank, Amara counted cash and counted breaths. Kletchi arrived near closing with an envelope, a repayment larger than required, and a note that said only, "For believing that a person can start again." She smiled in spite of herself. When he asked if she was well, she said the truth that still fit in a sentence. "Today is heavy." He said he knew a little about heavy days and asked if she would meet him at the small church hall later. No strings, just quiet. She went. A women's group was sorting donated clothing inside. The air smelled of floor soap and candle wax. In a corner, an elder with soft eyes offered Amara water and space. Sometimes comfort is simply a room where no one asks you to be brave on cue. Weeks passed. The new knowledge did not bruise less, but Amara learned where to place it so it did not cripple her steps. She drew lines. She would keep contributing to the house for a time, but she would also begin to save for her own place. Nothing grand, just a single room with enough light. She asked a church counselor about grief that arrives late and manners for leaving a home that does not want you unless you are silent. She kept working. Kletchi kept repairing, adding phone charging, sharpening knives, fixing fans. He hired a teenager to sweep and learned to say no to jobs that would ruin his sleep. When a man tried to underpay, Kletchi returned the fan, still broken, and wished him luck elsewhere. Boundaries sometimes sound like courage. They are often just clarity spoken aloud. Adi's boyfriend began arriving in louder cars and leaving with quieter promises. He proposed a sure investment that would flip funds in 2 weeks if only Adi's could borrow against the house through a microfinance deal. Chaik nodded along as if he understood interest rates better than gravity. Mom and Kletchi hesitated, then allowed a small trial with a signed paper Amara never saw. 2 weeks later, there was no flip, only a story about delay. The house grew tense, then brittle. People lowered their voices even when no one slept. If you have lived in a house where money is short and pride is long, you know how quickly laughter sounds like a stranger who forgot the address. One afternoon, a man in a pressed shirt delivered a notice that used too many words to say one thing: payment due. Amara read it twice, then asked quietly how much had been borrowed, against what, and who had signed. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She went to the bank manager the next day, explained the situation without throwing her family into the street with her words, and asked about options. Some problems don't bow to cleverness. They answer only to numbers. A plan was made for partial repayment over months, if the household could keep up. At dinner, Amara recommended cutting expenses and listing items they could sell without shame. Adiz called it negativity. Chaik promised to start the transport hustle tomorrow. Tomorrow is a faithful friend to unfinished plans. The market began to know Kletchi by name. Respect is a slow harvest. He showed up on time, said when he could not fix a thing, and returned deposits when he failed. People trusted his honesty more than his skill, though both grew together. One evening, he asked Amara about her father. What was he like when worry visited? She said he would sit outside with cola nuts, break one, and talk to the sky as if the answer lived in clouds. Then he would come inside and do one small useful thing, even if it was just fixing a squeaky hinge. "One hinge at a time," he used to say. Kletchi smiled and wrote that line in his notebook. If you have ever calmed a storm with a small task, you know the strength inside simple repair. 6 months after that first evening by the wall, Amara moved into a room behind the tailor's shop near the clinic. It was clean and bright in the morning. She bought a used kettle, a small shelf, and a mat. She told Mom and Kletchi respectfully, gave her new contribution dates, and left a note thanking her for years that had not been easy for any of them. Adiz laughed, but the laugh sounded thin. Chike shrugged, as if loss weighed nothing. On the first night in her room, Amara brewed tea and listened to rain stitch the roof together. She felt alone and not lonely. If you have ever stepped into a space you paid for with your own tired hands, you know how a door can sound like freedom when it closes softly behind you. Soon after, Kletchi received a visit from a man in a neat cap who said he was the foreman at a small manufacturing yard on the highway. Someone had mentioned a reliable repairman at the market. They needed a maintenance hand who would be paid modestly at first, with room to grow if he could keep machines from sleeping. The yard was owned by a cousin, yes, but not the kind that makes life easy. It would be work measured in grease and late nights. Kletchi asked for a day to think, then said yes. He kept his corner at the market on weekends and trained the teenager to handle small fixes. He paid down the loan ahead of schedule and brought the receipt to the bank with quiet pride. Some victories don't shout. They ring like a small bell you can hear only if you stop talking. One morning, Mom and Kletchi arrived at the bank, face tired, voice firm but softer than usual. She asked to speak with Amara privately. She said the house struggled. The boyfriend was gone. The paper on the table had grown teeth. She did not apologize with words. She explained with honesty. Amara listened, felt two truths rubbing against each other, pain from old dismissals and compassion learned from a man who would not take money he did not earn. She spoke to the manager about restructuring what could be restructured, warned that the bank is not a charity, and then, with her own savings, paid one installment to buy time, not rescue. "Time helps the willing," her father used to say. The air in the office felt clearer after she repeated it. Have you learned the difference between saving someone and giving them room to stand? The day finally came when the house reached a balance point. Sell the spare furniture, close the debt gently over months, and learn to live smaller without living lesser. Adiz, facing a mirror that offered no loans, found work assisting a caterer who paid in cash and lessons about waking early. Chike's transport plan became actual trips, one at a time, with a friend's motorbike and receipts he could hold. Mom and Kletchi began brewing zobo in the evenings, selling to offices that liked something cold at noon. Pride is a flexible fabric when hunger starts asking questions. The family did not become wealthy. They became honest about numbers. That is a wealth many never touch. As for Amara and Kletchi, their story did not leap into palaces or headlines. It stayed where it began, in rooms you can clean in an hour and markets that remember your name by the third purchase. One Harmattan morning, Kletchi asked if he could meet the counselor who had helped Amara sort grief without sorting people into enemies. He wanted to learn how to lead a small team without shouting. In the same season, Amara attended a course on community finance and learned to separate kindness from confusion. They took walks by the river on Sundays and spoke about hinges, receipts, and the kind of future that fits inside their hands. If your heart is looking for a miracle, consider the steady kind that shows up at the same hour daily and leaves when the job is finished. A year after the first meeting by the wall, Kletchi invited a few people to the church hall. Neighbors, the workshop foreman, the teenager now grown surer with tools, the nurse from the clinic, and Mom and Kletchi, who arrived early and sat in the back. He thanked those who had helped him stand straighter. He turned to Amara and said he had no poetry, only proof, a ledger with balanced pages, a job that paid on time, and the patience to keep both. He asked if she would share a life measured in small, honest victories. She said yes without ceremony, because some words do not need drums. Later, over rice and stew that tasted better than celebration, Mom and Kletchi touched Amara's arm and said, "I was hard because I was afraid." Fear rarely apologizes, but when it does, the apology is heavy and real. If you have watched this far, I want to ask you something simple that is not easy. When have you chosen to help someone even when others said you were wasting your time? Did it change them, or did it change you first? And if you were Amara, hearing the truth about your origins in a room that has your memories on its walls, would you have stayed, or would you have stepped into a smaller place with bigger peace? Share your thoughts below, especially what you would have done differently at each turning point, at the wall, at the clinic, at the bank, and at the table with the hard news. Your answers might hand someone else a map they don't know they need. Weeks after that evening at the clinic, Amara began noticing how her walks home no longer felt heavy. She found herself pausing near the mechanic sheds, where the smell of engine oil mixed with roasted groundnuts, just to check if Kletchi was working. He often greeted her with a tired smile, his hands dark with grease, his shirt damp from effort. Their conversations were simple at first, about weather, prices of bread, the stubbornness of generators. Yet Amara left those exchanges feeling lighter, as if someone had finally spoken to her without judgment or expectation. She wondered if kindness could be a two-way road, carrying not just what you give but also what you receive. Have you ever realized that the smallest conversations sometimes become the ones you remember most clearly? But at home, kindness remained an offense. Adiz delighted in telling Mom and Kletchi about Amara's new friend, painting pictures of late-night whispers that never happened. Chaik added his share of jokes, warning that Amara might one day drag home a stray dog as her husband. Mom and Kletchi grew sharper in her reprimands, saying, "Amara, your duty is to this house, not to roadside strangers." At the dinner table, silence often followed her words, thick and unyielding. Amara learned to chew slowly, not because she wasn't hungry, but because her stomach twisted when every bite carried criticism. If you lived under the same roof, would you have defended yourself loudly, or swallowed your protest along with your food? Meanwhile, Adiz's romance with her boyfriend, Uche, deepened. He was tall, smooth-talking, and always carried the scent of expensive cologne. But people whispered his money came from gambling and dangerous deals. Amara once overheard him asking Adiz for more cash, promising he'd triple it in no time. Adiz giggled, treating his requests as if they were tokens of love. Mom and Kletchi, blind to the risk, waved off Amara's warnings. "Let her enjoy herself," she said. "She will still marry into the Obi family when the time comes. A little fun will not change her destiny." Amara swallowed her frustration. She had seen enough in the bank to know how easily small debts grew claws. Do you think love should excuse recklessness, or should someone step in when danger is already knocking? At the bank, Amara kept her focus. The pilot loan program she had mentioned earlier was slowly gaining attention. One afternoon, Kletchi came in to make his first small repayment. He stood in line like everyone else, no special treatment asked for, his envelope neatly folded. When he reached Amara's counter, he placed the money down with quiet dignity. She stamped his receipt and slid it back to him, their fingers brushing briefly. A warmth spread through her chest, surprising her. She quickly looked down, reminding herself she was at work. Later, she thought about how respect often hides in the smallest gestures, like standing in line when you could have asked for favor. If you've ever been touched by someone's humility more than their wealth, you know the power of integrity. One evening, as thunder rolled in the distance, Amara stopped at Kletchi's corner. He was wiping tools, preparing to close. They spoke about little things, how the rain helped cassava grow, how new streetlights made nights safer. Then, without planning, Amara asked about his childhood. He hesitated, then told her he had grown up in an orphanage in Enugu after losing both parents to illness. At 18, he had been told to leave. Since then, life had been a series of short jobs and long hungers. Amara listened, her chest tightening with each word. His tone was steady, not bitter, as if he had accepted the weight of his journey. She realized then that his silence on the roadside that first day had not been pride. It had been survival. If you were in Amara's place, would you have pitied him or admired his strength? The rain came suddenly, drumming against roofs and splashing mud onto their shoes. Amara opened her umbrella and moved closer. For a moment, they stood side by side, sharing the small shelter. Water rushed down the street, carrying leaves and scraps of paper. Amara glanced at him, noticing how his eyes followed the storm, not with fear but with thought. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "rain reminds me that everything can be washed clean, even if only for a while." She nodded, tucking his words into her heart. Later that night, in her room, she replayed the scene again and again, the sound of rain mixing with his voice. Have you ever kept someone's words because they felt like a truth you'd been waiting to hear? Back in her family's house, however, the storm only worsened. Adiz announced loudly that Amara was falling in love with a beggar, turning even small observations into ridicule. Chaik joined in, joking about Amara's roadside husband. Mom and Kletchi looked at Amara with disappointment sharper than anger. "Is this what you want for yourself?" she demanded. "While your sister prepares to marry into wealth, you choose to embarrass us with street men?" Amara clenched her fists under the table. For the first time, she spoke back. "At least he is trying to build something honest." "What are Adiz and Chaik building, Mama?" Silence followed, broken only by the clatter of Adiz's spoon. Have you ever reached a point where you could no longer swallow unfairness, even if speaking meant breaking peace? The weeks that followed tested Amara's strength in ways she hadn't imagined. Kletchi became a quiet constant in her life, someone whose presence steadied her when the walls at home felt too tight. She noticed how he saved every naira he could, never wasting a coin, sometimes skipping meals so he could repay the loan quicker. Amara admired this discipline, but it also troubled her. She wanted to do more to ease his burdens, yet she knew that if her family ever discovered she was helping him again, the accusations would be endless. Still, their bond grew in small, unspoken ways, like the way he always waited until she crossed the busy intersection near the market before turning away. Sometimes, care doesn't need words. It hides in gestures so quiet that only the heart notices. Have you ever felt safer, simply because someone chose to walk beside you? But while Amara found comfort in Kletchi's company, Adiz's life was spinning faster. Her boyfriend, Uche, became bolder in his demands. He spoke of investments, of big wins, waiting just around the corner, and Adiz believed him. One afternoon, Amara overheard them arguing outside the compound. Uche insisted he needed 50,000 naira for a sure deal, his tone sharp, his charm cracking at the edges. Adiz protested, but eventually her voice softened, and Amara knew she had agreed. Later that evening, Adiz boasted at the dinner table, twisting Uche's schemes into dreams of wealth. Mom and Kletchi beamed with pride, ignoring Amara's warning glance. "He is a smart young man," Mama said. "Not everyone can see opportunities when they come." Amara lowered her eyes, her chest heavy. If you were in her place, would you have spoken louder, or kept your silence knowing it would fall on deaf ears? Meanwhile, Kletchi surprised Amara with news. One evening, as they walked along the road lined with hibiscus shrubs. He told her he had been offered steady work at a workshop. "It's not much," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "but it means I don't have to wait on odd jobs." Amara smiled, pride warming her voice as she congratulated him. In that moment, she realized how deeply she wanted his success, not for herself but for him. It was a rare kind of happiness, one that asked for nothing in return. That night, as she lay awake listening to the crickets, she thought about how life can surprise us, how the people society dismisses can rise with dignity when given a chance. Have you ever rooted for someone so much that their victories felt like your own? But good news for Amara was bad news at home. Adiz caught her smiling to herself one night and pounced with suspicion. "Was it your roadside man who made you this happy?" she sneered. Kletchi overheard and stormed into Amara's room. "I warned you," she thundered. "Have you no shame? You want to ruin the future of this family with your foolishness." Amara stood tall, her voice shaking but steady. "Why is kindness foolishness, Mama? Why is Adiz free to waste money on Uche, but I am condemned for caring about someone honest?" The room fell silent. Adiz scoffed, but Amara saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. Sometimes truth cuts deeper than insults. If you were in Amara's shoes, would you have dared to confront the injustice, knowing it might unleash something worse? The breaking point came on a night when the generator hummed faintly in the background and rain tapped steadily against the windows. Amara had returned home late from the bank to find her family gathered in the sitting room. Their eyes turned to her as Kletchi stood. Her voice was low, controlled, almost too calm. "Amara," she said, "there is something you must hear." For years, Amara had felt like the outsider in her own house, but she had never expected what came next. Kletchi's words were knives wrapped in cloth. "You are not my blood. Your Real mother died before I married your father. He begged me to raise you, and I agreed out of duty, not love. You were never mine." The room froze. Adiz's smirk faded, Chaik's laughter died on his lips, and Amara felt her world tilt. "If you heard such words from the woman you called mother, how would you breathe again?" Amara staggered, gripping the back of a chair for support. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. Everything suddenly made sense. The favoritism, the constant criticism, the coldness that clung to Kletchi's voice whenever she spoke her name. Yet knowing the truth did not lessen the pain. It deepened it. She searched her siblings' faces for comfort, but found only unease and silence. Even Adiz, who had once delighted in mocking her, could not meet her eyes. At last, Amara lifted her chin, her voice breaking but firm. "If I was never your daughter, then why keep me only to remind me of it every day? Why not let me go?" The question hung in the air like thunder without rain. Would you have asked the same, or kept quiet, fearing the final thread of family might snap forever? Kletchi's response was sharp and final. "Then go," she said coldly. "If you prefer the company of that mechanic, leave this house. Choose him or choose us. But you cannot have both." Amara felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her chest. She looked at Adiz, who shifted uncomfortably, at Chaik, who avoided her gaze, and finally at Kletchi, whose eyes held no trace of love. Then she remembered Kletchi, his steady hands, his quiet dignity, the way he had spoken of rain washing things clean. For the first time, Amara realized she had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Her voice was steady as she replied, "Then I choose him." The silence that followed was louder than any storm. Have you ever reached the moment when the fear of leaving becomes smaller than the pain of staying? Amara walked out of her family's compound with nothing but her small bag and the pounding of her heart. The streets of Katora felt different that night, darker, wider, almost foreign. She had grown up here, yet suddenly she was a stranger in her own town. Kletchi walked beside her, his hand steadying hers. He didn't speak much, only glanced at her now and then, as if reminding her she was not alone. The cool night air carried the smell of roasted corn and damp earth, and for a moment Amara wondered if she had made a mistake. She was leaving security, even if it was cold, for uncertainty. But when she thought of Mom and Kletchi's words, "You were never mine," the ache hardened into resolve. Have you ever chosen the unknown, simply because the familiar had already broken you too many times? They found shelter in a small rented room near the edge of the market. The walls were cracked, the door squeaked when opened, and the single bulb buzzed faintly, but it was theirs. Amara sat on the thin mattress, the weight of her decision pressing down. Kletchi placed a small basin of water before her. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but at least you won't sleep under the sky." She looked up at him, her eyes burning with gratitude. In that simple act, she felt more cared for than she had in years under her family's roof. Sometimes home is not where you are born, it is where someone sees you. If you were in Amara's place, would the broken walls have mattered, or would the kindness have been enough? The days that followed were not easy. Amara continued working at the bank, leaving early each morning and returning late at night. The commute was longer now, and the stares from neighbors sharper. Whispers followed her. "That's the girl who left her family for a street man." But Amara learned to straighten her back and walk on. At the bank, she immersed herself in her duties, finding solace in the order of numbers and receipts. Yet at night, as she returned to the tiny room, she discovered a strange kind of peace. Kletchi was often there, working on small repairs for neighbors, his hands busy even when money was scarce. Their conversations stretched into the night, weaving threads of dreams. Sometimes strength doesn't roar. It hums quietly in the background. Would you have found courage in those small routines, or would the gossip have broken your resolve? Meanwhile, Kletchi's life began to shift. His reputation as a hard-working mechanic spread beyond the neighborhood. One day, a shop owner asked him to manage a corner of the workshop, promising steady wages if he could attract customers. Kletchi accepted with humility, pouring his energy into the chance. Amara noticed how his eyes lit up when he spoke of fixing engines, how his hands carried both precision and pride. She realized she was watching him transform, step by step, from survival into stability. At night, he would bring home small bags of rice or yams, insisting she eat before him. Amara's chest tightened each time. This was not wealth, but it was love in its purest form. Isn't it true that sometimes the richest gift someone can give you is the comfort of knowing you won't face tomorrow alone? But outside their small sanctuary, Adi's world was cracking. Word reached Amara at the bank that Uche had been caught in a raid connected to gambling debts. Whispers said he fled, leaving behind unpaid loans and angry creditors. Amara knew instantly that Adi's blind trust would soon drag the family into ruin. That evening, as she returned to her rented room, she thought about her sister, the girl who had mocked her every choice, yet was now entangled in consequences she had ignored. A part of her ached for Adi's. Another part reminded her of Mom and Kletchi's cold words. Could forgiveness survive such wounds, or would you have turned your back completely? At night, when the kerosene lamp flickered in their room, Amara often replayed her life like a broken song. She thought about the years of silence at the dinner table, the longing for her father's gentle voice, the endless striving for a mother's love that was never truly hers. Yet she also thought about the small, steady joys she now had, the sound of Kletchi's laughter when something amused him, the taste of roasted plantain they shared on quiet evenings, the sight of him bowing his head in prayer before sleep. Slowly, she began to see that pain and joy can live side by side, and sometimes joy doesn't erase pain, it simply makes it bearable. Have you ever discovered peace in a place you never expected to find it? The cracks in Adi's perfect world widened quickly. Uche had vanished, leaving behind debts that whispered his name in every corner of Katora. One afternoon, men in dark suits arrived at Kletchi's compound. They carried papers and heavy expressions, announcing that the house had been mortgaged months ago without full repayment. Adi's signature was on the documents. Kletchi's knees buckled as she read the words, her pride collapsing under the weight of ink and negligence. Chaik shouted in disbelief, demanding explanations, but Adi stood silent, chewing her lip, realizing too late that her love for Uche had blinded her. Neighbors gathered outside, murmuring about the once proud family now facing disgrace. Sometimes downfall comes not with thunder, but with quiet signatures on paper. If you saw your sister gamble away the home you grew up in, would you forgive her mistake, or see it as betrayal too deep to heal? Meanwhile, Amara's days followed a different rhythm. At the bank, she earned quiet respect for her diligence, often trusted with complex transactions others avoided. Customers began to notice her calm presence, the way she explained figures without condescension. Each evening, she returned to her small room where Kletchi was waiting, his hands blackened from grease but his smile bright. He had expanded his corner at the workshop, gaining new clients who appreciated his honesty. Together, they celebrated small victories, an extra bag of beans, a new cooking pot, the joy of a steady meal. These moments, though simple, were more precious than gold. Amara realized she had left behind grandeur and insults for something far richer: peace. Isn't it true that sometimes life asks us to trade comfort for dignity, and in doing so, we find treasures we never expected? News of her family's misfortune reached Amara through whispers at the bank. A colleague mentioned seeing Kletchi arguing loudly with creditors, her voice breaking into sobs. Another said Adi's had been spotted alone, her once polished clothes wrinkled, her laughter gone. Amara listened quietly, her heart torn between pity and memory. She remembered the endless mockery, the words that had cut her soul. "You are not my blood," yet part of her still ached. Blood or not, they were pieces of her story. That evening, she confided in Kletchi. He listened, then said gently, "Some lessons must be learned in the fire, Amara. You offered kindness, and they threw it away. Do not carry their burden, but if your heart still bends toward them, that is your strength, not your weakness. If you were Amara, would you return to help, or would you let them face the storm they created?" The family's decline grew worse. By the end of the month, officials arrived to repossess the house. Furniture was carried out, wardrobes emptied, and for the first time in years, Kletchi and her children stood outside their gate, homeless. Neighbors who once admired their wealth now shook their heads in pity, or in satisfaction. Adiz wept, clinging to her mother, while Chaik muttered angrily about betrayal. Kletchi's proud posture had crumbled. Her eyes carried not authority but regret. In that moment, she remembered Amara's steady warnings, her quiet resilience, her decision to leave. The words she had once spat, "You were never mine," now tasted like poison on her tongue. If you had mocked someone for years only to see them rise as you fell, how would you face the shame? Meanwhile, Kletchi's determination began to bear fruit. One evening, he returned to their small room with unexpected news. The workshop owner, impressed with his dedication, wanted him to manage the entire shop. It meant longer hours, more responsibility, but also stability and better pay. Amara's eyes welled with tears as she listened. "You see," Kletchi said softly, "hard soil can still grow fruit if we keep planting." Together they celebrated with a modest meal of jollof rice, laughing as if it were a feast. Amara realized then that wealth wasn't only measured in money. It was measured in trust, respect, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow would not crush them. Have you ever celebrated a small achievement so deeply that it felt like a crown upon your head? The wedding bells of Katora rang louder than gossip. Months after leaving her family's house, Amara stood at the threshold of a new life with Kletchi. The once struggling mechanic now managed his own workshop, his hands no longer only tools of survival but symbols of progress. Together they had built something that even wealth could not buy: trust, resilience, and love tested by hardship. The ceremony was modest compared to the grand affairs the OBs once flaunted, but the air was filled with genuine joy. Friends, neighbors, and even some former skeptics gathered, whispering about the girl who had been mocked for kindness yet rose stronger. For the first time, Amara walked into a room where every smile was sincere, not calculated. Isn't it remarkable how true joy shines brighter in simplicity than false pride in luxury? In the crowd sat Mom, Kletchi, and Adiz, their faces marked by regret. They had lost their home, their wealth, and their standing, and now watched as the daughter they dismissed embraced a future they could only envy. After the ceremony, Mom Kletchi approached, her voice trembling. "Amara," she whispered, "forgive me. I was blind. I thought wealth was everything, and I failed you." Adiz, once so proud, lowered her head. "Sister, I mocked you, but I see now you chose the better path." The hall grew quiet, waiting for Amara's response. She looked at them for a long moment, her heart heavy yet steady. "I forgive you," she said softly, "but I have moved on. My life no longer rests on your approval." Forgiveness was given, but the doors of her heart remained guarded. If it were you, would you embrace them fully, or protect the peace you fought so hard to find? That night, Amara and Kletchi walked home together, their hands entwined. The moonlight cast silver on the dusty road, and the night air carried the scent of hibiscus and roasted yam. Amara reflected on her journey, the years of silence at the family table, the sharp sting of rejection, the moment she chose freedom over familiarity. Each wound had shaped her, but none had broken her. She turned to Kletchi, smiling through tears. "I thought I lost everything," she said, "but it was only making room for this." He squeezed her hand gently. "The soil that is turned over looks broken, but it's preparing for new seeds." In that moment, Amara knew she was finally home. And so the story of the girl who was once mocked for kindness became a lesson for all who listened, that sometimes the greatest power lies not in wealth or blood, but in courage, humility, and love. If you were to look at your own life, where have you found strength in the very places you once thought were weaknesses? Now I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Amara's place, would you have forgiven Mom, Kletchi, and Adiz, or walked away for good? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might inspire someone else watching this story. And if you'd like us to create a second part exploring what happens after Amara and Kletchi's marriage, let us know below. Don't forget to like this video if the story touched your heart, and click on the subscribe button so you never miss the powerful stories we share here.